Well, please be seated. Once again, it's great to gather both in person and over Zoom. And when we first started doing services over Zoom, if you remember, the pandemic hit, and for a couple Sundays, I was recording things and putting them on YouTube for people to watch. And it was Sushil Jacob who called me, and he said, Reverend Jim, we can do this over Zoom. And I had a lot of questions and reservations. And he said, no, we'll make this happen. We can do this. And through his help and him kind of producing a lot of things behind the scenes and the help of Nancy Duranto and Dr. Neil Poe and Robin Henke, we were able to start doing services over Zoom. But there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that you don't really notice or are aware of when you just tune in over Zoom. And there was one Sunday where I was here looking at my camera, preaching to Zoom, and you don't realize, but if you're on the speaker view, if you become the speaker, the camera will stay on the last person to talk for me. And so you guys at home will see me, but I'll see oftentimes Deacon Frank, the last person to talk or the last person. And there was one Sunday where I saw Sushil and Ami during my sermon, but they had done one of those virtual backgrounds, you know, how people have that. And so while I'm preaching at the camera and no one else, all of a sudden Sushil moved a little and his head disappeared. And then Ami moved and like her whole person just disappeared because it was like something with the technology and the virtual screen took over. And I don't think any of you noticed, but I was preaching and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, and I wanted to laugh and it was very distracting. But it reminds me of sometimes you peel the curtain back and you look inside and there's a lot going on behind the scenes that you're not aware of, right? And that happens in so many aspects of our lives. And so oftentimes too, we see that with social media. You look on someone's social media, like on their Facebook or whatever, and they're like having this great life and it looks amazing. And it's, oh, wow, they're doing these fun things. Look at all that person's doing that. And it's almost this curated projection of someone's life. And you kind of wonder, oh, if we pull back the curtain a little bit, well, what's really going on? You know, what's really happening behind the scenes? And I recently read that there's a company where you can send them photos of yourself and then you pay them money and they will Photoshop pictures of you into beautiful places. And so you can have a fake vacation. You can post on your social media sites pictures of you at like Niagara Falls or in South Africa, Cape Town, or wherever you want. They will make it so that it happened, right? And this is all kind of fairy tale life because we all have this idea of what we want our life to be like. We have this idea of what we want our identity to be. We have this sort of inspired by fairy tales and Disney and all that stuff. We want life to be like this. And sometimes we can project that out to the world. But when you pull the curtain back, what's really going on behind the scenes? There's a TV show I've enjoyed watching during the pandemic called The Crown. And it's about the Queen Elizabeth and the British monarchy. And it's beautifully filmed. The cinematography is amazing. They get these beautiful locations where they film the show. And so you'll see monarchs, getting out of a Rolls Royce and walking into a palace and then going through this beautiful salon, this beautiful room. They'll go to a library or they'll go to this other, and it's just incredibly well filmed. And it's kind of this ironic contrast because you're watching these characters and it's a fictionalized version of the royal family, but they just seem so miserable and they just seem so wounded and so dysfunctional. So it's this contrast of this beautiful place and these miserable, dysfunctional, wounded people. And it's brilliantly written and all that, but I love that contrast where it's like allowing you to peel back that curtain and what's really going on behind the scenes. And in today's gospel passage, we see King Herod. You think he's the king, he can do whatever he wants. And yet he has this banquet, and his daughter dances, and he makes this foolhardy pledge, and then ends up having to execute John the Baptist, even though he really doesn't want to. You would think the powerful king can do whatever he wants, and yet he doesn't want to look bad in front of the guests. He doesn't want to go back on his oath, and so he's actually powerless, and he has to do what his daughter requests. And against his own desires and wishes, he executes John the Baptist. And I wonder if John the Baptist, when he was growing up, was being told, oh, you're set aside, you had this miraculous birth, you're going to be a great prophet. And he might have pictured, oh, my life is going to be like this, things are going to work out for me, I'm going to have fame, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have that. And instead, God said, no, you're going to speak truth to power. And the people in power are really not going to like it. And John had this fairy tale vision of life. And yet, when you pull back the curtain, it doesn't end well for John. Now, I feel like so far, this is kind of a depressing sermon, kind of saying, we pull back the curtain, everything's messy and difficult and more complicated than we want it to be. But we have the epistle reading for today, Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And one of the themes in the book of Ephesians is Paul talking about the cosmic everything and the heavenly places and in the fullness of all creation. And he's talking about all that is. And he's saying that once you peel back the curtain of all universe, all creation, you see grace upon grace upon grace. You see the love of God you see grace abounding deeply in that space. And that is inspiring because I don't have to try and live up to the social media posts. I don't have to try to live up to this kind of life or that. It's like I can abide in the grace of God that abounds when you pull the curtain back. A couple months ago, I preached about that. What if you assume people are doing their best? And I was preaching that because I was trying to do it too. And over the last couple months, I feel like I've been, as I go out and interact with humanity, when you walk around town, when you drive and run your errands, trying to intentionally have this mindset of everyone is trying their best. And I don't think you can see any change in me during that time outwardly. Like you can't post that on social media that you're assuming everyone's doing their best, but it changes you. If you're interacting with the world that way, it makes you more sympathetic. It fills you with more empathy. But again, it's not something you can see on social media. It's not something where your identity can project and portray. Well, I'm a different person because I'm assuming everyone is doing their best, right? And yet it's a change on the inside. And the goal is for us in this time of ordinary time where we're wearing green and we have this lengthy period, is to try and lean into the story of God and not lean into the story of social media or Disney or fairy tales or any of that, but lean into the story of God. And there we find grace upon grace upon grace. And as we do that, then when people look at us, not look at us on our social media thing, not look at how we project, but if people were to pull the curtain back on you and your heart, ideally they will pull that curtain back and then they will see Jesus. Amen.